Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Midday Western U.S. Regional Forecast video brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. So to understand the pattern that we're going to be experiencing throughout the month of February, I went back and I reconstructed, using the driest Februaries on record for the western region, what the upper level flow pattern of the atmosphere is. And your eyes are probably drawn right here to this large ridge that's in place. And what happens is the flow comes around around the Aleutian Islands and then dives into a trough along the west coast, but it's split just offshore into a subtropical branch here and a polar branch there. And the problem with that split is its placement. If it stays there in the Gulf of Alaska or tucks itself into just onto the west coast of the United States, this is a blocking weather pattern and it tends to dry things out. Versus if we can get that ridge to shove west or east, doesn't matter, just displace it, get it away from where it currently is, we would have a much different pattern. So that's going to be the thing we're going to be looking out for if February is going to come in dry. And this is what I want you to notice. We're going to play for you here every 6 hours through the next 15 days what the flow of the jet stream is going to look like. So remember, troughs are in blue here, ridges are in red. So we notice that starting off the time period, there's a deep trough over Alaska. We would have to replace this whole region in here with warm colors, hence ridging, in order to really bring in a much drier pattern for the western United States. As we press play on this, let's pause it right here and just watch it again real quick. We see that through the weekend, a deeper trough still sits right in this area. So the flow is going to be coming right here out of the Central Pacific straight into the northwest between this trough and that ridge. So very wet conditions in the near term. But as we play on forward, we notice that that trough sweeps in down here into the Four Corners states, while a ridge is beginning to push into this area and a trough settles in there. And that is the pattern we don't want to see. Because as we pull this out into the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, now getting out to the 9th and 10th of the month, we're seeing the pattern really favor more ridging here with troughing back on the back side there, and the flow comes right around it here and almost this high, see it, over low pattern. Therefore, what this is going to do is this is going to bring about some change in the flow across the Pacific and even start to pull back on some of the precipitation amounts that we've seen in the Pacific Northwest, which as of late have been quite wet. So we still have another week where we're going to experience that, but things are going to calm down. What we need to see in any sort of change here is we've got to get rid of the, this is way downstream, but right here over Greenland, got to move this trough out. We need to redevelop the ridge that would sit over parts of the Aleutian Islands here to get that flow to come back in the configuration that would give us some wetter conditions. So if we look out just over the next 15 days, we see the influence of the ridge putting a high pressure cell, which we've now been talking about for quite some time here, sitting just offshore. And that's been the one that has been keeping things very dry for California, especially Southern California. And we notice in the next 15 days that's going to continue to be the picture. Again, with the ridge pushing in here, the flow initially coming over, but then diving into a trough, then taking on off just like this, meeting up with its subtropical branch. And that's just the wrong setup to give us a very wet February, especially for California moving forward. So this is what's starting to concern me. We've been monitoring very closely the precipitation in California, and we've now seen the first stage of drought showing up in the latest drought monitor. Not too much in terms of change here in the drought in the Pacific Northwest over the last, compared to the previous drought monitor to this one. Of course, we've been seeing quite a bit of coastal precipitation in Oregon and Washington, but we still see that region showing widespread drought, especially in the rain shadow area here. That's primarily been because the flow has been really coming in perpendicularly to the mountains. Really, the drought that's in the Four Corners states has not changed much at all either. So just something to think about here as we get a little bit further inland. Now, despite the dryness in the forecast, right now reservoir conditions across the state of California are very near their historical averages. So what we get concerned about is when we start to see those dividing lines, I'll draw an arrow to one right here. When we start to see those dividing lines showing up above where the blue column is in each one of these reservoir graphs, then that tells us that we are below average on our reservoir fullness, relative fullness for this time of year. But certainly when we look back over the last 30 days, we know that that pattern has been avoiding much of Southern California, Nevada, and Arizona here, whereas we've been bringing much more precipitation to the Pacific Northwest. So when we analyze this by region, especially when we look at our snowpack, this is the Northern Sierra precipitation stations. So just to draw a line here, we're right here in this time period, right at the end of January, beginning of February. We're currently sitting there, and remember, average is this point. So we are more than halfway through, well, our wettest time of year. So we really need to pick up on precipitation over the next 60 days here. And as we just saw, it appears as though at least the next 30, you're going to see in a few moments too, does not appear to be aiding this. Sliding farther to the south, this gets worse. So notice how flat things have been right in through here versus where we should be for this time of year. So this is clearly a problem that's getting worse the farther south we go. So this is into the San Joaquin stations and now down into the Tulare. We're really showing up the deficit here. So this needs to really change fast, and it doesn't appear that we're going to be getting much of that change, not only in the next couple of weeks, but maybe even the 2 weeks that follow that. Again, I'll show you that at the very end of this video. So just look at the dominance of that high pressure cell. This is looking at total accumulated precipitation from the European model going all the way out through the next 10 days. And it's just sitting right here. So initially all of our weather systems are being diverted around it, just like this. And that is before the bigger ridge comes in here. So this has a hard time getting precipitation down here through the state of California over into Nevada or Arizona this time of year. And this particular slide summarizes what we're dealing with here over the coming days and weeks. So to zoom in and give you some totals here, just over the next week, European model still very wet in parts of the Pacific Northwest. We see that coastal Oregon and Washington, especially the farther north you go here, grabbing anywhere between, in some locations, 4 to 8 inches of rainfall. Again, with the flow coming in like this, our rain shadow shows up very well in parts of the Columbia Basin here, but we will be adding quite a bit of snow into the Blue Mountains, Sawtooth, and Northern Rockies. As you can see here, this is the snowfall forecast through the next week. Now, as this high over low pattern begins to set up, it's going to do something like this. We will be bringing in to the Intermountain West, most of the Rockies here, some bigger snowfall amounts in the coming next 10 to 15 days as this pattern establishes itself. But again, it is one where we don't bring in the atmospheric river events. They can't get through this. They can't do that, which is what we would want to see for California as we press into the month of February. So to give you some of the details, let's just kind of plan this out now. We'll take a look at our high-resolution European model. Let's pause it right here and bring it back for you. So this is what we're looking at early Friday morning, getting into Friday afternoon and evening. Here comes our first big event. You can see, look at the presence of that high-pressure cell. It's just dominant right in through there. So as we get into Friday night into early Saturday morning, we're starting to see the precip coming into coastal Oregon and Washington. And then the high pressure cell, you all of a sudden see it jump out here. This is as the ridge is beginning to build, but let's watch to see how it transitions. You see, precipitation could, by Sunday afternoon and evening, be sliding around that high-pressure cell, bringing in some snow to the mountains here, but we're not talking about much. This is kind of the wrong trajectory to be hitting the mountains. We got to hit them straight from this direction, not from the northwest. So some snow moves into the Snake River Valley, into Nevada, and does clip the mountains here, but we're not talking about major snowfall accumulations. Watch it again. This again, Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon and evening, getting into early Monday morning. But as we begin next week, the high pressure cell, creeps Monday into Tuesday, so much closer here to California. And where does our flow go? It goes right around it into British Columbia. So we get a bit of a break here early next week, but you'll notice we'll get right back over into that wet pattern for the Pacific Northwest, specifically Washington, as we get into next Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon and evening. You can just see the influence of that flow taking everything right over the edge. As we go out longer term in this pattern, what we'll notice here, this is next Thursday, getting into next Friday. A high pressure cell still sitting in place here, and that's what's directing things around. But we're going to see that ridge building in, which means as we look out into week 2 only, we're going to be showing up with drier than average conditions for most of the Pacific Northwest. If there is an area that may have this wrong, it's going to be this corridor right in through here. We may not be quite this dry compared to normal, but this is looking at February 8th through February 15th. That's the time period we're noticing here. To finish this up, I just want to give you the latest long-range European model projections here. And it appears that the pattern that we have suggested that it's going to go into to start the month may persist throughout the month. And this is going from February 10th through March 10th. And again, we are seeing this area occupied by much drier than average conditions. As the ridge tries to push in here and the flow does something like this, that is just the wrong configuration, as we detailed at the beginning of this video, to be bringing in the heavy precipitation amounts we need, especially in California, to kind of recover from the dryness we've seen over the last month. So it's going to be a pattern we're going to have to pay very close attention to watch for any breakdown in this. If there is any sort of change, it is going to begin over in Japan, and it'll show up next in the Aleutian Islands. We need to be watching for the jet stream to slow in Japan first. That will change everything downstream, but as it is right now, the flow is quite strong there, and it looks to remain that way for the foreseeable future. We'll keep an eye on it. I'll keep you abreast of any sort of changes that happen in the models over the weekend or any sort of shifts in the meteorology of this. Report back to you on Monday. Have a good weekend. We'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.